and I assume we'll have a lot more before the next 15 or so minutes. It's really a pleasure to be with you, and we appreciate you all joining us. We hope you're safe and well. We're going to start with a couple of norms. Our intent today for the next 2 hours is to go through the legislative session. I'll talk a little bit more about tomorrow's session in just a bit, but let's do some practicing. So we found out that when we have large numbers of participants on a webinar, the more video and microphones that are on, the harder it is to hear everybody, and the bandwidth tends to go down. So we're going to ask that you turn off your video unless you are speaking, and mute your microphone unless you are speaking. We have a couple of great features, of course, the chat box down below, and I'm going to ask you to use that in just a second. We also have a raise your hand feature, and since there's so many of us on the call, if I miss your hand and you have a question, feel free to put something in the chat box as well. So let's practice hand raising. Most of you have probably been on webinars now on more than one platform. I know I have. So let's practice in WebEx with hand raising. So would you go to your name in the participant box and find the little hand by your name and raise your hand. Just click on that. Oh, there are a lot of experts on the phone, a lot of hands being raised. Some of you, if you're on the phone, it's a little bit harder to raise your hand. Can be done. A lot of hands being raised still. Okay, it looks like most of you know how to do that. So go ahead and put your hand down. And then next we'll go to the chat box and open that chat box. And I guess I should start by telling you two things. First of all, this is Superintendent Sydney Dixon. For those of you whom I haven't met, I apologize. I know a lot of you, and we've been in this business together a long time for some of us. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate your work. Leadership at any given time is tough, but especially during this critical time of trying to keep our kiddos and our communities safe. And we know as leaders that you set the tone at the top, you set expectations for your students and families, you're providing emotional and mental support as well as academic and funding support, and trying to keep all of the plates spinning. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing for your kiddos, your families, and your staff. Second, I want to say that we'll talk tomorrow more about the way forward. Some of you have written to me, and I so appreciate that, and I take all of your comments to heart. I really appreciate thoughtful and creative ways that you're thinking about how to reconvene. That decision is made by the health department and by the governor, and I will be meeting with the governor this afternoon virtually to talk about the way forward. I have personally asked him to not wait until May 1st to make that decision, but to talk about the way forward, because it's time that people are thinking about graduation and closure and all of those activities. We make it based on health factors and science. If we were just making it on motion and wanting to see our kiddos again, they would be back in school, but we have to make it based on the best health information we have. So tomorrow morning, I'll start out with that, and we'll be taught whatever that is, whatever that announcement is going to be. I want to give you a heads up. And then we'll talk about the way forward and what we're planning on doing with some waivers and funding, etc. So for today, again, we're going to spend our time on legislation over the next couple of hours, and had a record year. So the dichotomy between this amazing record year that we're having, or that we had in the legislative session, and now this challenging time that we're having, it's quite something. It's just really quite a paradox. And the way forward, as we mitigate our way through all of this, some of the policy enhancements that have been made are helpful, and then some of the budgetary decisions really support some of those policies. So Angie will talk through all of that. But let's start by having some personal conversation. So I want you to think about your work right now, and maybe like us, you're teleworking, which has been super challenging, just working in isolation, or for some of us, it's juggling kiddos and trying to teach them while working, etc. We know that some of you have probably gone into your schools and are working from there. But what phrase of 3 words or less describes your experience with your leadership right now, whether you're teleworking or not. And just put those in the chat box, please. So Jenny Lynn's already put in meticulous scheduling. See, all these coming. There are 114 of you on the call, so we expect to see a lot of comments. Love these responses. Wow. Thank you so much, everybody. Keep these coming. I have to be honest, they make me feel emotional about how you're working through all of this and caring for your staff, your family, and for each other. So thank you for staying connected with other people. It has been all of the above, everything you're saying. With over 300 employees of my own, it's been interesting to see how everybody has reacted to teleworking and all that they're trying to deal with. So thank you for inspiring all of us with your words. I'm going to turn the time over now to Angie again. Feel free to keep putting information in the chat, and you know that you can send us a private message through there or just ask your question to everyone. I'll be monitoring these, as will Angie and Jeff Van Holten as they're speaking to you. So I'll turn the time over to Angie and she can introduce herself and Jeff to you all. Thank you.
Good morning, charter leaders. I'm Angie Stallings, and I am Deputy Superintendent of Policy with the State Board of Education. And I apologize if there was confusion yesterday or this morning when you received an email from me and wondering whether my meeting conflicted with Superintendent Dixon's meeting. We are one and the same, and we're here together and excited to be with you. For those of you who I haven't met, a lot of my role with the State Board of Education is working on the administrative rules that the board passes. I support one of the board's committees, the Law and Licensing Committee meeting, and also work by supporting Superintendent Dixon and the board with the legislature. So a lot of these things that we'll be discussing in a moment, we, as well as much of our USB staff, worked on behalf of you all and the rest of the public education community. And in a moment, I'll let Jeff Van Holten introduce himself. He and I are going to tag team this presentation today, and so you'll hear from us every couple of slides. We'll switch off. Jeff is policy advisor with the State Board of Education and works also in the same capacity I do, where he works directly with the board on many issues, supports rulemaking and the legislature. So that's a little bit about me. So let's go ahead and we'll start talking about an overview of the session in general. As Superintendent Dixon mentioned, we had a record year this year by way of funding, but also just good bills, I would say, that passed. You can see that we were tracking 198 bills this session and 56% of those passed. That was pretty high percentage rate in comparison to other sessions we've had. Usually we see about a 40 to 45% passage rate. I would say the reason that we can attribute this higher passage rate than normal is that a lot of the bills may not have been as large or substantive as they have been in the past. Our staff made an effort to work to amend existing programs based on either audits or other things we found. And it seemed like this year more than ever, a majority of the bills came from education stakeholders versus from individual interest groups or ideas that maybe the individual legislators had based on individual constituents. So it was a great bill, great session policy-wise as well as funding. So let's keep moving and we'll talk about more of the funding in a moment. First, good news is that we had a record year, $403 million of funding this year. You know, in past years, what we would consider a really good year is when we hit 250. And normal years might be somewhere between 150 million and 250 million. So that was a record amount, and we'll talk about the WP in a moment. You can see that you can anticipate at least 31 board rules from us coming your way. Don't smile too big about that, but most of the time, you're often supplementing provisions that the legislature passed or amending existing rules that were updated due to legislation. You can see we've got 1 new program as well as 5 new grant programs that are coming, 11 new reports, and 6 requests for proposals or RFPs that our office will be issuing as a result of the session. Okay, next. So one thing that was really exciting this year is that the legislature appropriated a 6% increase on the WPU, which is the highest I've seen, I think, in the 15 years that I've been watching the legislature. Typically, we're very excited when we get 4%, so 6% was wonderful. That resulted in a 9.5% increase in the school program with an ending budget of $5.91 million. I think that, was somebody going to say something there? Sorry, I thought I heard something. The good news from that is I think what this demonstrates or shows is the wonderful relationship that the public education community has now with the legislature. It's a team effort, and we want to thank all of you for the work that you did working with legislators in your areas to strengthen that communication and that relationship that we have with the legislature. So I should state that all of this is subject to change, unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as many of you may know, we will likely have a special session, a first special session this week, and a second special session will likely come at the end of April or beginning of May. We'll probably discuss that more in detail tomorrow in the Tuesday meeting that starts at 1 o'clock. And if you saw, I sent out an agenda last night that talks about today's focus is about the 2020 legislative session. Tomorrow we will talk more about the way forward, including waivers from the federal government, state waivers, and requests for statutory changes that we've been working on with the legislature related to COVID-19. Okay, and the last 2 slides simply give you some more information. You can see $252 million. That is all from the WPU and enrollment growth, and 6% WPU is approximately $200 million to $50 million of enrollment growth money. You can see some additional numbers on the voted and board local levy programs. And now let's go to the next slide. The next 3 slides I'll go over briefly. They highlight 16 or 18 of the top funding programs aside from the WPU that were funded this year. Most of these line item appropriations we will discuss when we discuss the accompanying bill, but there are 5 line items that were not associated with the bill. So the first one there you can see is $30 million one time for student safety, and there's no real strings attached to that at this point. It would be to support student safety, whether it's in buildings or other investments you'd want to make. The other item next is $7 million of ongoing funding for the computer science grant program. That bill passed last year and provided $3 million approximately of one-time money. And now the legislature chose to fund that at $7 million ongoing. Those are supports for computer science grants and to fund computer science in your schools. The other 2 on this slide you can see are the Create Utah software licenses have been continued. that was previously funded one time. These are your Adobe licenses. And so that was funded at 1.8 million, as well as a state level contract with Qualtrics, 900,000 one time. And so that helps. If you weren't aware, that you have the ability to, you rely on our contract with Qualtrics to do different surveys or other things that you would normally use Qualtrics for. And then last, you'll see this last one is transportation funding, which doesn't really apply to charter schools, but we'll talk about the rest of these individual line items as we go through the bills. One thing I forgot to mention before we get to the question I have for you to enter into the chat box, I wanted to clarify that we welcome you asking questions, whether you want to ask your question in the chat box, or if you'd like to raise your hand or have your video come on so that we know that you have a question. Please feel free to ask us questions along the way, or share comments related to bills. We want this to be interactive as we go. So right now, what I'd like you to do is just to take a minute, and in the chat box, please list which bill you are most interested in discussing today. There are 135 of you, so I would anticipate seeing at least 30 or 40 responses of a bill you're looking forward to talking about. I see HB 242, student safety. I guess the question I have on that, and maybe you can give me the clarification, is that about the kind of this year's version of HB 373, the school safety program that provided funding to hire mental health supports in schools? So when you say student safety money per student, please clarify whether you're talking about the one-time funding or whether you're talking about the last year's HB 373 money for mental health supports. So somebody states, I thought they were retracting the funding increase due to COVID. And so the answer to that is likely. And if Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones is on today, he might be able to provide some additional information, as well as Superintendent Dixon. But we do anticipate that there will likely be some money that may be pulled back. And there is a potential that the $30 million of student safety funding might be cut. So we're still waiting for those special sessions to pass and to happen to see what the results are. Anyone else from the USBE team want to comment on those questions, specifically about the WPU and funding, in addition to what I've already stated? We don't have any potential cuts. We don't have any absolute numbers yet, or even projected numbers. We're still waiting. I think that the tax commission is waiting on to provide information to the governor's budget staff, as well as the legislature's fiscal staff. So I think that all of the fiscal staffs for all three, the board, the governor, and the legislature, are still waiting for information to understand what potential cuts might be needed.
Angie,
stay tuned.
Yep. I'll just chime in. I saw a lot of people weighing in. This is tricky with 139 people. I'm trying to catch all of the comments. I see a lot of people that are interested in the safety, and as Angie mentioned, with the one-time money, it's highly likely that we would see the one-time go away. They're currently looking for carry forward funds, one-time money, and everything that they can find. But again, we don't know the shortfall until the tax commission and others give their report based on the revenue that comes in. So, we would just say for now, and we can talk more about it tomorrow, we're not counting on any new programs being funded. Like, we're taking a scenario of maybe growth and inflation and some WPU and thinking about what that might look like in your budgets. And then the other extreme is everything fully funded, which is highly unlikely. So it's probably somewhere in between those two. But the easiest things to take back are one-time funding a new program. So just keep that in mind as we talk through today.
Yes, I saw the last piece of feedback as well, that said, is there any way we could move away from line items and grant programs and put more into unrestricted funding or the minimum school program? I saw that piece of feedback, so there's always a balance there, of course, but good feedback. Superintendent Dixon, I was not able to see because I think there were quite a few comments. I mostly saw HB 242 as well as school safety. So we will talk about this year's version of HB 373, which was HB 323. We'll talk about in a moment. We'll also talk about the charter school bill. Okay, SB 151, just trying to quickly see. The computer science initiative grant program, I'm wondering if you're wondering more about the details of that program from last year, or were you wondering about the new 7 million and whether that could be cut? And then I see HB 14. Okay, well, that was very good. We'll make sure and spend some time on those bills as we go through. Again, feel free to insert additional questions if you have as we move along. All right, Jeff, if you want to go to the next slide and introduce yourself.
Sure. If I can you all hear me at least, if not see me?
Yes, both.
Thank you. So House Bill 99 is the one on your screen now. It is the Enhanced Kindergarten Amendments Program by Representative Lowe and Senator Hilliard. This bill takes, as you may recall, there are currently 2 extended day kindergarten programs that we have in Utah Code. One is called KSEP, which is the Kindergarten Supplemental Education Program. The other one is called the Optional Enhanced Kindergarten Program, or OEK. What House Bill 99 did is it took KSEP and merged it with OEK. And the reason for that was the KSEP program was funded with CANF money, which lasted for 3 years only. Those 3 years have ended, and so we are now merging these programs. We get an additional $10 million on top of the $7.5 million that we already have for this program. And it takes one element of KSEP and moves it over to OEK. Currently in the OEK program, if you're getting funding for the optional enhanced kindergarten program, there are no performance metrics you have to report. If you got the money from the CANF funding through KSEP, you did have to report exit data from your KEEP assessments to show that at least 50% of the schools participating had met the proficiency levels by the end of kindergarten in order to be eligible for the funding in the following year without having to go into a system of support. So that element is now being moved over into optional enhanced kindergarten with this expansion of the additional $10 million. So if you get this money, you will now have to report your KEEP data, try and maintain 50% or more of your schools, if you have multiple campuses participating, hitting proficiency at the end of the year with KEEP. That is House Bill 99. There are no questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and move on to House Bill 114. Just a moment. I apologize if you see my eyes darting. I have 3 big screens around, trying to make sure that I look at the camera though for the most part. House Bill 114 is the Early Learning Training and Assessment Program. This is a new bill and it does 3 separate things. The first thing is, I'll start at the bottom of this slide. It establishes a requirement for teachers to get a license. So in order to get a license, you will now also have to pass a literacy preparation assessment, which essentially is showing that you are prepared and ready to teach according to the science of reading when it comes to literacy. So that will be a new requirement in order to obtain a license moving forward. The other two components of this bill relate to literacy and early learning. The first is, well, what about existing teachers that already have a license? So the second component to answer that is there will be a grant program that's qualified. So it'll be based on a formula. Every LEA will get their proportionate amount of money to go toward professional learning for teachers to learn more about the science of reading. So this will be early learning professional development. The money will be set aside. It's $4.8 million. It will be set aside for pre-K to grade 3 teachers. And the way that we are going to distribute money is just on a proportionate basis. So there are about 87 to 8,800 pre-K to grade 3 teachers in the state. We would divide the 4.8 million we receive evenly amongst that amount. So however many of those you have is essentially the amount you would get. This year, the math will equal roughly $450 per teacher on pre-K to grade 3. The final piece of this bill is it creates not only an early literacy, you may be familiar with the early literacy plan and the early literacy requirements. This now adds early mathematics to that. So we will no longer have an early literacy program alone. It will be early learning. And it will be early literacy combined with early mathematics. There will be a requirement that you offer through grades 1 through 3 a benchmark assessment, just like you do for literacy in mathematics. So you'll see a mathematics version of DIBELS or Acadience coming your way in the near future, and that will be a requirement. You will also need to have an early learning plan to include mathematics, not just an early literacy plan. So it will expand that out to include the mathematics piece. So it's not necessarily, to answer Julie's question in the chat box, it is not another plan. You would be amending your early literacy plan to also include the exact same elements, but for early mathematics. So I guess tomato, it's an expanded version of an existing plan. So there's more to put in, but it should be very similar, if not identical, to what you do for early literacy. So those are the 3 main components of House Bill 114. There are no other questions. Glad to see some of you are excited about that one. We are too. We'll pass it back to Angie to talk about funding.
Okay, great. So these 2 bills, SJR 9 and HB 357, are companion bills. First, we'll talk about SJR 9, which is a resolution to amend the Constitution, the Utah Constitution, to allow revenue collected through the income tax to be used to support services for children as well as individuals with disabilities. Currently, the Constitution only allows that revenue to be used on public ed, K-12, as well as higher ed, our public colleges and universities. So if SJR passes, then HB 357 would take effect. If SJR 9 does not pass this fall, this November in the election, by at least 50% of the voters voting in favor of it, then HB 357 does not take effect. So HB 357, let me tell you what that bill does. So the bill creates or changes the name of an existing restricted account within the Uniform School Fund to the Public Education Economic Stabilization Restricted Account. The reason why this account is important is it is included in the Uniform School Fund, and the Uniform School Fund is still constitutionally protected and any revenue in that Uniform School Fund can only go towards K-12 public education. So although the Constitution would broaden where all income tax revenue go into the education fund, a sub portion of the education fund is this uniform. And what would happen each year is that an amount equal to the portion of enrollment growth as well as an inflationary index amount, so about 2%, which is about equivalent to 2% of the WPU, would be deposited into that account, and that amount would be funded in the base budget each year versus waiting until the end of the session to be funded in the final budget. The reason why that is significant is it essentially makes it so that that enrollment growth and that inflationary amount, that 2% of the WPU, is taken care of the first week of the session. And we are not, we don't have to lobby for it or request the legislature appropriate it. It would just be a done deal every year in the base budget. And the idea is that that amount would be funded every year, even when we had a downturn. The portion of the revenue, like I said, would come directly from the tax commission into that account versus it going into the larger education fund and having to be appropriated by the legislature separately. Although not as important to you, it's something that you might be interested to know is that in those years of an economic downturn, it allows school districts to use their capital revenue for maintenance operations or salary purposes. Are there any questions about SGR 9 or HB 357? It was a pretty monumental and bill that, if it passes, could provide some real stable funding moving forward. Okay, Jeff, go ahead. I don't see any questions.
Great. I will take this next one on Senate Bill 99, Senator Milne and Representative Val Peterson. This bill essentially is aimed at creating a program and funding system for principal pipelines. So we're talking about new principals, so new, aspiring, and existing principals, and providing different levels of support for each of those different stages. So the bill itself is actually quite short. It doesn't really say too much. It delineates a lot of the creation of this program to board rule. So this is one of the board rules that will actually be heard later this week in the Standards and Assessment Committee on Friday with the board. Essentially, this creates a grant program that an LEA or a consortium of LEAs can apply for. So if there's a group of charters that wanted to get together and apply for this fund, they would be able to do that collectively rather than having to do it individually. And the funding would go toward, there's two elements we're putting in the board rule. I'll give you a little teaser that's outside of this slide. First, there'll be a planning grant. Everyone who applies can get up to $15,000 for a planning grant to create the plan of how you would implement a leadership program at your LEA level. That plan would need to include, per the bill, Senate Bill 99, residency and internship opportunities for aspiring principals. So those teachers and other staff members you feel that are up and coming leaders, providing those opportunities. Mentorship for principals who are new, and the bill defines those to be principals that are within their first 3 years. And then continued professional learning opportunities for the existing have that are beyond 3 years. And fitting in some components that we'll have in board rule that are also part of Senate Bill 99 that would need to be required for that professional learning. The implementation grant, so everyone can get a $15,000 planning grant. The implementation grant will be competitive because we requested $15 million and received $5 million for this program. But that is essentially what this does, creates more supports for leaders, including all of the charter leaders. I should specify, I'm using the word principal. The principal was defined to include charter school directors. And again, you can apply in a consortium if you are feeling you're really small and you want to get together with several other smaller charters or even bigger charters if you want, and apply collectively for funding to support director development for a whole group. You'll be able to do that. So it should be exciting. And I've got a question, would this include support for charter principals to gain their administrative license? Yes. You could include that as an element for what you would use the funding for, specifically the professional learning element. The part that's competitive is the implementation grant. So everyone can get $15,000 for a planning grant to create plans on how you would create this leadership development program at the LEA level. But because of a limited amount of appropriation, we won't be able to give everyone an implementation grant to actually carry out their plans with all of the funding. So it will be awarded on a competitive basis, more approached from a pilot view at this point, and then hopefully expanding this out in years to come when we can get more funding to do it. Back over to Angie.
Okay, the next two bills we'll talk about are about school accountability. Some of you may be familiar with the school turnaround program, and many of the elements of how schools who've been designated as low performing schools in the turnaround program, how they get out or exit turnaround, is very detailed or has been very detailed in state code. So this bill eliminates some of the criteria that was limiting the flexibility for the board to create the exit criteria in board rule. So we're excited about that. Instead of having to go back to the legislature every year when we find out different ways of calculating how to measure the growth of a school, because our assessment systems have changed, et cetera, we will now be able to do that in our board rule. So watch for changes to that program, the board rule provisions related to the turnaround program coming later this spring and early fall. SB 119, that bill, as many of you know, the board this last fall did not issue letter grades related to the 1819 accountability report, and we worked with the legislature. Part of that was as a result of some of the problems we had with our contractor Questar, who was providing rides. So this year we worked with the legislature to give the board the ability not to issue letter grades for the 18-19 school year, as well as for the current school year we're in for the 19-20 school year, which is very nice and welcome, especially considering what recently happened. For those of you who I'm sure you all know, the board made a motion to suspend statewide assessments for this school year. And related to that, we are working with the legislature on the Utah code provisions that need to be updated to waive the statewide the requirement to administer statewide assessments this year, as well as the accountability provisions. And so we already received a waiver from the federal government for those assessment and accountability provisions, and now we're working with the legislature to amend the Utah code provisions. So are there any questions about that? We'll talk more in detail about the federal waivers as well as the work we're doing with the legislature in tomorrow's meeting. So go ahead, Jeff, with the next slide.
Okay. The next two slides are going to be about safe and healthy schools, one of the four elements of the strategic plan of the board. And I will highlight all of these different bills that you see as I'm looking off to my right. This is where my slides are. I'll start at the top with House Bill 58, the e-cigarette bill. This one has several components, so and it has funding attached to it, so you might want to take note on how this one works. First component of this bill is it does give schools the ability to confiscate and destroy e-cigarette paraphernalia without having to turn it over to law enforcement. So it's great that you'll have the legal backing to do that yourself. You are encouraged to seek out law enforcement if you believe the e-cigarette paraphernalia to have illegal substances in it. And then you can contact and send it to them and let them deal with ramifications. The second component of this is the underage drinking prevention program. For those of you who have secondary grades in your charter school, you may be familiar with the underage drinking prevention program that has to be taught at least once in 7th and 8th, and then in 10th and 12th grade, or 10th and 11th, sorry. Currently in conjunction usually with your health curriculum. This bill would now require that the underage drinking prevention program to also be taught in 4th or 5th grade. So if you are a school that, or a charter school that only does elementary school, you might want to take note, this will be a new thing for you. You'll have to incorporate underage drinking and substance abuse prevention is actually what it says in the bill into 4th or 5th grade curriculum. We have a question about how about, what about parents? Can we destroy it or do we have to turn it over to parents? This actually gives you the legal ability to, and Angie's got you covered right there in the chat. You don't have to turn it over as long as you have a policy in place. Really good legal backing for you guys. The third part of this bill is it will require all schools, regardless of what grades they have, to create a positive behavior plan and to appoint an administrator or staff member within the school to be the positive behavior specialist and carry out positive behavior programming. So essentially what that's saying is you'll need to have somebody set aside in the school to run programs, clubs, support groups, think Hope Squad or Golden Gate Club or the like, whatever you choose. And the staff member who runs that would receive a $3,000 a year stipend. You will also receive an additional $1,000 to create the positive behavior plan. And they did fund that at $4.8 million, which should be enough to cover all schools. So everyone will be getting that $3,000 stipend for an administration staff member or teacher to run the positive behavior, to be the positive behavior specialist and run those programs, and to also make sure that with an additional $1,000 to get materials, supplies, and whatnot to outline a plan and carry it out. There's a question, is the underage drinking and substance abuse prevention contract for fourth and fifth grades still with Botven? Currently, it is still with Botven. We are looking at possibly amending that contract to expand the ability to use Botvens in fourth and fifth grade as well. And for those who are unfamiliar with Botven and what we're talking about, that is the vendor that currently provides the underage drinking prevention program for the secondary schools that are required. So to be continued, but I do believe there is some looks inside at USBE to see if we can expand and use Botven, or if we need to go out to a full request for proposal. Stay tuned. I do believe we're going to try and expand that. So that was House Bill 58. It took a little bit of time on that one because I want to make sure you all understood. Take a little bit of time also on House Bill 323, and then I'll try and make these other two short. House Bill 323 is the school mental health amendments. There's two main components you should be aware of. The first, it allows you as an LEA to now offer mental health screeners. So think similar to vision screenings, but mental health. It is optional. Parents would opt in, and you don't have to do it if you do not want to as an LEA. There is a little bit of funding attached to this bill, $500,000 total statewide, to procure a mental health screener. The bill does require that in order to have a mental health screener that you offer, it must be approved by the state board. The state board has that in conjunction with the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health. They already have several free and very low-cost screeners, that they being the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, that they're recommending. So be on the lookout for those. They'll be coming from our student support staff. But there will be some money for that. And then the rest of the $500,000 would go out statewide to LEAs on a reimbursement basis to help qualified parents. One thing you're not allowed to do with these mental health screeners is diagnostic and then require treatment. It would be kind of bringing red flags to the surface and letting parents know they exist, offering them a list of resources that the state board is required to create for you, or you will have to create a library of resources. And then you would be able to make the recommendation. Your student has the following red flags. Here's some potential doctors, services you might want to consider. If the parent is a qualified parent, you would be able to provide them financial assistance to receive treatment and seek reimbursement from the state board for that. 171 very quickly is threat assessment or threat amendments. This one makes it a crime to make a threat toward a school, which is defined in the bill to be a preschool, elementary, secondary, or post-secondary school. It also makes threats that are hoaxes, so not real legitimate threats, part of the crime. So the students who call in the bomb threat because they think they're being funny could potentially face some criminal charges. They're diminished for people who are under the age of 18. House Bill 16 is a school breakfast bill that you didn't hear about. There's another one you'll hear about in a minute that made the rounds on Twitter. This one simply changes some language regarding how what we can we, the state board, can use state money for when it comes to school meals. Currently, the law reads school lunch. So we could only provide the money we got on the state level for lunch only. It's now going to say school meals. So you can use it for breakfast, lunch, after school, summer programs, all of the things that are offered. The state school board will now have more flexibility to allocate that money to other purposes, just including lunch, but the other ones as well. This does also require that your governing authority annually review whether or not the schools within your LEA are serving breakfast and to look at why they might not be if they are not. It does not require any additional reporting, however, just requires an internal conversation with your governing authority. Did you mention the changes to the match? I did not. Thank you, Angie. I got wrapped up in mental health screener. So I'll jump back to House Bill 323. This is the other big part. Last year, there was House Bill 373 that created the Qualified Mental Health Professionals Grant. That grant, you may be familiar, is $16 million. We got this now $26 million this year and moving forward to hire mental health professionals at the LEA level. Hopefully a lot of you received funding for that. One of the caps was it requires you match the funding in order to get it. Moving forward, you all submitted, if you got this money, a 3-year plan. You have to continue your match for the next 3 years of the plan. So you should be about done with year 1. In the next 2 years, you'll still have to do the match. But this now allows you to count your TSSA money that you get from the Teacher Student Success Act or account funds that you got starting last year. You can use that money as your match now, where before you could not. The other great thing about this is once your 3 years is up and you submit a new plan, any new plan that's submitted after April 1st of 2020 does not have a match requirement at all. So eventually you'll phase out of the match requirement, and if you have yet to applied last year and you're going to try this year, you won't have a match requirement moving forward. So those are some exciting developments in that area. If there are no questions, I will move forward quickly. House Bill 222 is a breakfast bill you did hear about all over Twitter and in the news. Just to recap, there's 3 elements to this bill, the third element being a waiver from the first 2 requirements. So keep that in mind. There is a waiver that will come through board rule. We're hoping to have that ready by May committee meetings. The first 2 requirements is if you participate in the National School Lunch Program, you must also participate in the National School Breakfast Program. So if you're offering school lunch, you must offer school breakfast if you're getting the federal reimbursements. The second piece is if you are participating in the National School Lunch Program and you now have to do the school breakfast program, you also will need to offer breakfast after the bell. You can offer it before school still, but you'd have to have food continually available after the bell has rung for schools with a certain student population size or higher free and reduced lunch. So the first year is 70% or more of your student population reduced lunch, breakfast after the bell. The second year, 50% or more, breakfast after the bell. And the third year, 30% or more, breakfast after the bell. Again, there is a waiver requirement or a waiver to those first 2 requirements that you can seek, and the board rule outlining that process will be available next month. There's a whole host of questions here. I will defer to Angie in the chat. It looks like her and Sid are taking care of some of these questions on the TSSA money and how it can work for the match. I will jump over. Senate Bill 37 is the fund piece for House Bill 58. So we talked about e-cigarettes, positive behavior plans, $3,000 plus $1,000. That's essentially how it will be paid for long term. This will create a tax on e-cigarette products. So we did put that there. That's an element of how that's funded. House Bill 392 is a continuance of a pilot program that had sunsetted last year, and we brought it back. They did not sunset the funding for it. There are currently 3 school districts participating in the pilot: Loch Silver, Provo, and Ogden, and the early warning system that they are using the money to procure essentially allows their existing student information system to be looked at in a new way. The system would allow all the data to be aggregated and compiled and red flag students who are at risk based on attendance, based on social emotional issues they may be having. All of the stuff you input in the student information system is basically being calculated and looked at through algorithms to kind of help those school districts identify students who are potentially at risk for something, and providing intervention recommendations that you can put in place before you need to actually provide real interventions. A really good preventative tool. This bill brings that program back and gives a little additional money for days that on board this year, about 105,000 more one time. House Bill 384 is one that you all brought up, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this one. As you recall, this is the bill that deals with, can you refer a student to the juvenile court system for behavior issues? The last 3 years in a row, 3 years ago, we changed, the legislature changed that law to say you cannot refer a student to court unless you have done an evidence-based intervention first. And if that doesn't work, then you can refer. That language expired. It does expire in July. And so the question this session was, do we just get rid of court referrals altogether and you can't do it? Or what is the new path moving forward look like? House Bill 384 creates a new path. It is similar. So you still have to do your evidence-based intervention. If that doesn't work, or if it's an option the student is turning down, you would then go to the Juvenile Justice Department and utilize their services. You could refer the student to them, and they have programs that if those don't work or the student chooses not to comply with those, then you can refer to courts. So it essentially adds a new step before you can refer to courts, and that is referring to juvenile justice system. That is rolling out, information to come on how that will look exactly and the services that are going to be offered and how to utilize them. So be on the lookout for those, but also keep in mind that the bill has a 2-year expiration date. So once again, 2 years from now in the 2022 session, we will be having the conversation again. Do we get rid of court referrals altogether? That has not ended by this bill. Just kick that can down the road. We'll go to the next slide. It's your brain break.
Before you go to that brain break, I would just maybe ask if people have additional questions about those bills. We saw a lot of questions about HB 323, as well as, you know, the TSSA match and how that works. Does anybody have any questions about that they'd like to ask verbally over, like unmute and ask the question for more clarification, or have the answers we've provided in the chat box been sufficient? Okay, looks like everybody's good with the chat box answers, and also you're always free to engage with our student support staff directly and ask more detailed questions offline also. So thanks, Jeff. And I apologize, Jeff, I was going to let you go ahead and ask this question, but I'll do it now. In the chat box, what we'd like to hear from you is, what piece of legislation from this session do you think will help you most as a leader? And while you're doing that, I will answer the question that somebody just typed in there. Can someone confirm the WPU increase will not be reduced? Unfortunately, we cannot confirm that at this time. That is all subject to change, and we'll have to see what happens in the upcoming special sessions. We anticipate one happening this week and one happening either at late April or early May. I'm seeing a lot of SB 99 mentions, leadership grant, HB 58, the positive behavior supports.
Angie, if I can jump really quick and answer the House Bill 222 question.
That'd be great, Jeff, go ahead.
The waiver is going to be in board rule. It will hit committee in May, full board in June, and be out for public comment in July. So you should be able to apply beginning of August for that waiver before the school year starts.
Jeff, there was another question that I think you're best to answer. What type of behaviors can we refer to the justice system related to HB 384?
That's a really good question, one that I think has lingered for a while in relation to when do you typically refer a student to courts and for what reasons. They've been very LEA specific. They haven't really been universal across the board. So I would say whatever your current discipline policies hold within them would be the best place to start. And you should make sure you have those and that they're updated. We do have model policies on our website as well if you are looking to update or compare what you have. But that's where I would start first. This typically has been utilized in the past for truancy, sending students through the juvenile court system for truance. But it can be for disruptive behavior. So I would start at the local level with what your policy is, make sure that's up to date, check our model policy to see if it matches. And that'll give you kind of a good clue as to process we see moving forward in terms of when students get referred to different services. Not be the most specific answer, but that's probably where I would start.
I saw one question in the comment box about model policies and just asked, were you asking for specific model policies related to a certain bill? And then will this information be available somewhere to reference again? Yes, it will. So the FAQs, that's a good question. I'll show you later on today where at least this PowerPoint presentation will be available, but are you asking whether the responses that we've been providing during the chat be available somewhere to reference again? And that is something that would be very helpful if we could get a copy of all the comments in this chat box. That is not my forte, and maybe Superintendent Dixon or Jeff or somebody know.
We have a way to capture those. Yeah, they're out. Yeah, that's easy. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. And we can share those with our the individual staff from the different questions you asked and pass those along to them. Yes, you can use the TSSA money to support your mental health professionals as long as that is, you include that in your TSSA plan. It is an allowable use of TSSA money to pay to support mental health professionals for the costs of hiring them. Hey, that looks good. Looks like we got a lot of good feedback there. Thank you so much for everyone who inserted different bills. The two bills that I think I saw the most were SB 99, our school leadership bill and program, and HB 58, the ability to get additional supports for a positive behavior specialist. I saw that. So that's great. All right. Go ahead and move on then to some additional bills. Thank you all for your feedback. HB 334, Civics Education Amendments, creates a pilot program for about 3 LEAs to participate in a project-based demonstration for students to demonstrate what their civics education engagement. And right now it's not in lieu of, meaning those who participate in the pilot, your students will still be required to pass the basic civics test before they can graduate or receive a diploma. But this pilot would be an ability for us to look at what a potential project-based program would look like in lieu of that basic civics test assessment that seniors or graduates are currently required to pass before they get a diploma. SB 73, Reading Assessment Expansion Amendment. That bill was tied to an additional, and I should mention before I move on to SB 73, that civics education pilot program does have funding tied to it. It's a little under $300,000. So if you do apply to be one of the pilot LEAs, there is some money that would come with that. SB 73, Reading Assessment Expansion Amendments, that bill provided a $1.5 million appropriation to fund the use of Acadian for the DIBELS assessment tool in grades 4 through 6. So that would be on a voluntary basis. It's not mandatory to use it in grades 4 through 6. You know, right now it is mandatory in grades K-3, but this bill simply allows you to continue to use that with your upper level or upper grade level students if you choose. Okay. Just saw a question about the 4th, 5th underage drinking program. Is it expected to be at the level and time of the 7th and 8th grade program? I don't know that I know those details. And I'm guessing you're wondering if the time commitment to, oh, it looks like Jeff's answering. So I'll move on to SB 93, Math and Science Opportunities for Students and Teachers, or the MOST program. This bill is rebranding an existing program called the U-Star program. And for probably some obvious reasons, we wanted to because it often was confused with the higher ed U-Star program. And so like I said, it's an existing program that provides reimbursement or funds for you to support your teacher contracts or stipends for secondary level, and I believe it might just be high school level, 9th through 12th grade, teachers who work with students in math and science. And so it's rebranded, but it's also provided some additional flexibility in what you could use that money on, including stipends. Okay. Sounds good. I see a comment about the governor's directive. I believe that happened last week, but I will let maybe Superintendent Dixon answer that question in the comment box while I continue forward. So the next 2 slides are bills that are related to school employment. HB 141, the Educator Salary Incentive Program amendments. So this bill kind of impacts 3 different programs: the Educator Salary Adjustment and Professional Staff, as well as the TSSP, or Teacher Salary Supplement Program. So first I'll talk about how HB 141 impacts the Educator Salary Adjustment Program and the Professional Staff Cost Programs. So some of you may have been tracking this last year that the State Board of Education changed its licensing requirements related to school social workers. So prior to the passage of that rule, the school social worker was required to hold 2 licenses. 1 license from DOPL, the Division of Professional Licensing, of Occupation and Professional Licensing, and 1 from the board, the State Board of Education. The license change that we made at the board level says that now an LEA, when they hire a school social worker, the school social worker could have just simply the DOPL license and not both. And the reason why the board looked at that is because last year in the 18-19, or actually this 19-20 school year, the public education system hired 50 new school social workers. Of those 50 school social workers, 8 had both licenses. So the lion's share, or 42 out of the 50, only had 1 license, the DOPL license. So now what this bill does is it would, in addition to it not being a license requirement, it allows those school social workers who only have the 1 license to qualify for the educator salary adjustment, as well as to count towards your distribution under the professional cost staff program. The second thing the bill does is it amends the teacher salary supplement program. If any of you have teachers who are math, science, teachers who work with students with disabilities, computer science teachers, you may know that last year, the amount that we had for the appropriation to support the TSSP program was not enough to fully fund the stipend. And so we had to send out an amount. And I can see now why you guys are chatting in the box, because my phone is buzzing as right next to me with an alert. So maybe I'll take a pause in just a moment so that we could talk about whatever that is, in case maybe Superintendent Dixon, I could just ask you to.
I'm happy to weigh in. So on our on my briefing call this morning, they were talking about they've been testing the system a little bit just to make sure that they can broaden the scope beyond the emergency alert system. So my guess is that the governor in his press briefing said something about May 1st again, and this is the stay safe, stay home rather than a quarantine of a shelter in place. This is the way that governor and the team have been approaching it. So I think he just reiterated that at a press briefing, and then they probably tested the system. So sorry about that, everyone. They were talking this morning that they needed to try it out because they'd had some glitches.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that if there was anything we needed to talk about, that we could have that pause for a moment. So thank you, Superintendent Dixon. Okay, next I'll move on to HB 107, Effective Teachers in High Poverty Schools. This is an existing program that currently teachers in grades 3 through 8 can receive an incentive or a stipend if they show an MGP score. It's a median growth percentile, meaning their students have made a certain amount of growth over the year based on the RISE assessments. And what this bill does is it extends that incentive program to teachers who work with students in grades 1 and 2. And the way that the educators in grades 1 or 2 would qualify for this program is it's based on the number of students who hit a certain benchmark on the reading assessment, or Acadience, or formerly known as DIBELS assessment. So one thing I will just note while we're talking about this program, the Effective Teachers in High Poverty Schools, because we have suspended state assessments this spring, we will not have any of those stipends. We will not be able to give those out this next year because we'll have no student growth percentiles, nor will we have the benchmark for those students in grades 1 and 2 to measure performance by. So, but it will eventually, when we get back to our statewide assessments, that is something now that is available to your teachers in grades 1 and 2. And just a reminder, when an LEA would have to provide a match to support that stipend. So you all at the LEA level have to decide whether or not you want to work with, it's only high poverty schools, thank you. So it's effective teachers in high poverty schools. And you as an LEA or a charter school would have to pay for half of that match. You have to qualify as a high poverty school under that definition. Okay, next, HB 148, Utah Recognizing and Inspiring School Employees Awards Program. This program is going to be done through the governor's office, and they're going to be soliciting nominations of classified employees who should be recognized and highlighted. So if you have employees that you want to honor, watch for notices from the governor's office for nominations, listing nominations. HB 22, Utah Retirement Systems Amendments, talks about, or it deals with potential employees you might be hiring who have retired from the Utah retirement systems. It allows people who've recently been retired to now come back and not have the same impact to their retirement that they did before HB 22 passed. If you are going to be hiring somebody, and you are a school that participates in the Utah retirement system, I would recommend that you reach out to URS or an HR support person to find out how that would impact the retiree that you're considering hiring. If you do not participate in the Utah retirement system, URS, then likely HB 22 has nothing, it wouldn't impact your employees either way. But you'd want to double check that if you have questions. Okay, next, HB 108, Medical Specialists in Public Schools. This bill really doesn't change anything legally, but it essentially states that a district or charter, if you have salary schedules and you differentiate based on different types of employees, that an LEA may establish a separate salary schedule for medical specialists. So that would be like your occupational therapists, your speech behavior or speech pathologists, your mental health support staff. So it's not requiring it, and legally it wasn't even really needed. You already have that authority, but in some ways this is kind of a message bill. Okay. The last Three that deal with school employment. I'll go over these quickly. HB 195 is actually SB 195, background checks for minor employees. This bill states that if you hire students, for example, who are under the age of 18, and normally in those positions, those are the types of positions that you would have require a background check for. You do not have to get a background check for minor employees, those under 18. HB 344, Sex Offender Restrictions Amendments, simply states that a sex offender may not work in a school setting or with as a coach or in a co-curricular or extracurricular activity capacity. HB 416, penalties for misconduct with students. This bill amends an existing requirement that says that an educator may not have inappropriate relationship with a student who is 18, even though that student is 18, that they still may not have those inappropriate relationships with the students if the student is in the same school, in the same LEA, or if that student participates in an extracurricular or co-curricular activity that the educator also participates or overseas. And you would think that this would seem like a no-brainer bill, that you wouldn't even need this bill. But we have had some instances where educators have had inappropriate relationships with students who are currently, they're 18 years old or 19 years old, but they are still public education students, and these penalties apply to them as well. Slide. All right, Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. I will go through these slides hopefully a little bit quicker than I have the last ones. I did want to just highlight Justin's question that was asked about bot bins and the underage drinking. I do have confirmation from staff now that bot bin, if they end up being the vendor that does the underage drinking prevention curriculum for grades 4 and 5, has an elementary school curriculum. So that is something that's already available, and it is different and scaled back in certain ways than the secondary offering. So post-secondary bills. For the groups of people in your LEA that deal with college and career readiness, this is kind of the area that might be of interest for them. So if they are not you, please take some notes and let them know. The first two bills, House Bill 103 and across the way House Bill 256, these are both bills dealing with scholarships that are offered at the state level from the regents, the Board of Regents. The first one is a Utah Promise Scholarship. So this specific scholarship that they offer, this just changes a little bit of how it is calculated, the amount that they award. Keep in mind, this was passed last year and created, and the idea of this scholarship is to be the last dollars in after everything else, including private scholarships, financial tuition waivers, all of those things. This just now allows for fee waivers and tuition waivers to not be considered part of the amount of money before being the last dollars in. So it allows for the Utah Promise Scholarship to be a little bit larger. House Bill 256, simple requirement in order to get a Regent scholarship of any kind, like the Utah Promise Scholarship or any of the others they offer, you have to fill out a FAFSA form first. That is now a requirement. Bill 409, the concurrent enrollment amendments. This bill essentially does two things. It now allows and requires the Board of Regents, along with the higher ed institutions, review every year on an annual basis if there are any courses they could offer that are upper level courses for CE, or concurrent enrollment. So, excuse me, this would now no longer, it would allow them to offer more than just a 1,000, 2,000 level course, them being institutions of higher ed for concurrent enrollment. Currently, there aren't any offered, but this might change that. The other piece of this bill is it will increase the funding that the state receives based on student enrollment growth in concurrent enrollment rather than student enrollment growth. Excuse me. As you can imagine, student enrollment growth statewide is far lower than the incremental increase we've been seeing in students participating in CE. So this changes that funding mechanism. House Bill 336, I'm actually going to go to the next slide and highlight that one at length for you. This is another concurrent enrollment bill. And this one it streamlines something that is already possible, but now makes it a little more accessible by putting it in a program. And it also requires all concurrent enrollment credits earned through this program to be transferable across all 8 public institutions in Utah. So Weber can no longer say no to the University of Utah's English credit if it's earned through this process, which has been an issue in the past. So the first 2 certificates, the Launch and the Discover certificate, they are issued by the State Board of Education. The Launch certificate is any student who receives 6 concurrent enrollment credits in any subject can apply for a Launch certificate from the State Board of Education that only 6 credits to be transferable. The Discover certificate is the next step. It's 15 concurrent enrollment credits, and it has to be 3 credits in each of the following: arts, humanities, life sciences, social behavior sciences, and physical sciences. If a student completes that, apply for a Discover certificate from the State Board of Education. In effect, get rid of half of general ed requirements when they go to college. Transform certificate is the next step. This one is issued by the Board of Regents, not the Board of Education. And this one allows the Board of Regents to set in board rule the requirements for it. But the end goal of this one is whatever the requirements end up being, if a student ends up with a transform certificate, they will be exempt from gen ed requirements at one of the 8 institutions of public higher ed in Utah. So that's a really big deal. Something that has not really been touted or pushed in a program before, and it's been difficult to do. So be looking for the Board of Regents rule on that one. Other outlier here, the Transform CTE credential applies just to technical college credits, and it would essentially do the same, in effect, the same thing the Transform certificate does, but in a technical college setting. So the gen ed requirements in tech colleges would be waived if a student completes a CTE program in high school that is at least 900 hours, or they've earned 30 credits for that CTE program. So that is House Bill 336, really exciting. We've already got the marketing plan laid out for us in the bill, what we call these. See if there are any questions. Anything here. So post-secondary round 2, the other slides. These are smaller bills, but still notable. Senate Bill 162, if you have a criminal record, you can now apply for financial aid. You could not before. Senate Bill 117 allows a student who receives a Regent scholarship of any kind, like the Utah Promise Scholarship or the Regent Scholarship, at a private institution in Utah. So this essentially allows a student now to enroll in UIU and Westminster with that scholarship, where before they could not use it. Senate Bill 151 takes the accelerated student program as we know it in code and splits it out. So now Gifted and Talented is its own program. ATIB is called Early College, and then we still have CE as 3 separate programs now. It does not change any of the funding or the funding distribution for those programs, but it now makes it cleaner in code for us that they're 3 distinct programs. Jonathan says it's a pilot program. What does this mean? Great question. So I will back quickly to House Bill 336. So this is a pilot program. We received $800,000 for this program. So essentially 8 LEAs will be able to apply and roll this program out. And the idea would be to scale it out over time statewide. But it is a pilot program and it will be revisited down the road. I don't see this one being too difficult to scale out statewide. Essentially, it's making sure the systems between the LEAs and the state board regarding these CE credits are working and that we're able to streamline and automate as much of this as possible. But for now, they're going to roll it out in a phase. So this is phase 1 with a pilot of 8 LEAs. And how do LEAs apply? There will be an application. We'll be putting out a board rule with the application and the elements that you will need. That board rule is not going to be heard until the June committee hearings. So that will give, the application will be ready probably around the beginning of September. to kind of give you a timeline, but you'll be able to apply to be one of the pilot LEAs if you're interested. If you have further questions on this, Nathan Ock and Sarah Young here at the State Board of Education are the two people best to talk to about. If you have really enhanced interest in this and want to get a head start on it, they would be people to talk to. Is IB at the elementary level part of IB or just the DP program in the high school? My understanding, and Sid and Angie, you correct me if I'm wrong, but what we did in Senate Bill 151 is split out AP IB from gifted and talented as it relates to high school students, but
Yeah, it's just referring to high school at this point.
thank you. Yes, I'll post those names in their email address in just a moment, Jonathan. And I'll pass it back over to Angie.
Sorry, it takes me a minute to unmute sometimes. So the next two bills are what I would call charter school specific bills. The first one actually, let me talk about SB 94 very quickly before I move to HB 242. So currently DCFS, that's the Division of Family and Child Services, in statute is allowed to provide certain information to school districts, and I would have argued that extended to charter schools, but now SB 94 explicitly grants DCFS the authority to provide information to you all as charter schools as well. And often that might be information you're wondering about related to somebody you might be hiring or somebody you're investigating due to misconduct at your school. So let's go ahead and move to HB 242. Jeff, could you flip to the next slide, which shows a little bit of an overview in more detail. So I apologize, there's a lot of words here, but I just thought it would be easier to kind of summarize this so that you all can look at it as I'm speaking to it. But the first big change, so before we talk about the actual bill, many of you may know that the State Board of Education last fall created a charter school task force. It included a number of individuals. I believe I saw that Justin is on here. I'm not sure if that's Justin Riggs from Reagan Academy or not, but Justin did participate, as well as Stephanie Archibald from Summit. We had other state charter school board representatives, state board representatives, some legislators. It was quite a lot of work that went into making some recommendations from that task force up to the State Board of Education. The recommendations of that task force, as well as some things that the State Charter School Board had been working on before the task force even, resulted in a lot of what is included in HB 242. The first big change from HB 242 is that beginning with this next year, that charter schools will be required to use GASB accounting standards versus FASB. So all LEAs, charter schools and school districts will all be using the same accounting standards of GASB. The second change that's not so big for you all because you all already have existing charter schools, but for those of you who are considering working to open new charter schools, this change will impact those who are applying in the future. But any new charter schools would begin as a provisional charter for 3 to 5 years, and then they would receive their ongoing or final approval at somewhere around the 3 to 5 years into operation. So the first year of those 3 to 5 years, though, does include that first year prior to the operation. So it's the year that you are a charter school, but you're not necessarily serving students. That could serve as your first out of the 3 to 5 years. And then after that, after those 3 to 5 years, the authorizer could give the school the ongoing or final approval. The other thing that this bill does is it permits an authorizer to do a number of things, like request a court to appoint a neutral receiver in the event of a school closure. It allows an authorizer's decision to remove a director or a charter school director or their director of finances, for example, or a board member, a local charter school governing board member for up to a year. Some of the authority for an authorizer to remove a director or financial operations manager or board member are already in code, but there was a question about how long that could last for, and now those decisions could stay in place for up to a year. Also, it permits an authorizer to request financial documents from its charter schools, and something that's not listed on here. Oh, actually it is, I apologize. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that it clarifies that documents that are held by a third-party provider that is working with the charter school, that those documents are the property of the school. And so the school has access to those at any time, as well as that becomes something that's important sometimes in the event of a school closure as well. The other thing that this bill does, and the middle point there that talks about how if a school closes, that the authorizer could help support transferring students from a closing charter school to another charter school. And so those are new provisions. Also, the last thing that's not listed on the slide that HB 242 does is if a school has been designated as a turnaround school or a low performing school in the turnaround program, that school could still participate in the voluntary school improvement process where they could work with another charter school to take over that charter school. If the turnaround charter school is taken over by the second charter school, that initial or the first charter school still is subject to all of the school turnaround provisions, even if they're taken over by the new charter school. So those turnaround provisions stay with the school until the school exits the turnaround process under the criteria of the turnaround program. So I kind of went through that bill very briefly and at a high level. Are there any specific questions about HB 242 that I could answer? And I do know, I saw before, we do have some of our state charter school board staff colleagues who are also on, if there's specifics that you're wondering from an authorizer's standpoint. If not, if there are no questions, then we can move on. So one question it looks like is HB 242 only for charter schools or for neighborhood schools as well? So there are provisions at the beginning of the bill that relate to district schools as well as charter schools, and those are the provisions related to the annual financial reports and using the generally accepted accounting principles and GASB for reporting. So now those are all uniform, the same accounting standards and principles. Financial reporting is uniform for district schools as well as charter schools. But the rest of the bill, the lion's share of the bill, does apply to charter schools only. So one of the questions is GASB training. Is there funding for GASB training? And so in a moment we will talk about, so now as far as GASB training, I don't know if Scott Jones or somebody else has any more information on that. I don't, but I will say that another bill that relates to this is a bill we're going to be discussing in a moment, HB 67, which provides funding and supports for financial systems. Is $4 million that was appropriated to us to provide for either grants or reimbursement for your financial systems.
The intent of HB 67 is to help you transition systems to, I mean, we know charter schools are on different systems, right? Some are further along with all the different required modules. But that would be an integral part should that funding continue. Now, remember, as Angie stated early on, everything's up in the air right now, but it would be our intent to fund your training to go to GASB, or we would provide it ourselves internally to you.
Thanks, Scott, for weighing in there. And I also saw Jennifer Lambert mentioned that there would be GASB training coming in the future. Any other last questions about HB 242 before we take a little brain break? Jeff, why don't you move to the next slide? And if any of you have any final questions about HB 242, under GASB, can we still use QuickBooks, or are there recommended systems? And it looks like Scott's responding, there will be recommended systems. I don't believe QuickBooks will be one of the recommended systems, but Scott will let you know. As you can see, there might be different versions of QuickBooks, and certain versions might be appropriate versus others. So stay tuned on that. So this is the question. I'd like you all to take a moment, if you could, and provide some feedback in the chat box. Did you have a personal experience related to a piece of legislation that was noteworthy this session? And if it's not legislation, maybe it's an experience you had meeting with a legislator or working on a funding priority, anything like that. Had some positive experiences with legislators or on related to legislation this session? Not seeing anything. So, well, I've got crickets going on, so nobody wants to share anything. Hopefully that's just a reluctance to share and not the fact that you didn't think this was a positive session. I will move on if I don't hear any or see any comments in the chat box. Okay. Well, I guess I will move on. I was wanting to give you all a little bit of a break from hearing my voice, but I'll continue. So the next couple bills, HB 77, education funding amendments, and it looks like we've got about 30 minutes left. So we'll hope to get through some of the next 5 or 8 slides fairly quickly, so that we can reserve some time for you all at the end to ask any last questions or make any comments verbally if you'd like. HB 77, education funding amendments, is a bill that will cap the amount of property tax that is raised to be put into the TSSA account. So currently, for every 1% of the WPU that is funded, approximately $5 million of property tax is raised, and that amount would then be distributed in the TSSA account, which then is distributed to all of you. So assuming the 6% were to stick for this year, $30 million of property tax revenue would have been generated related to that 6% and deposited into the TSSA restricted account. HB 77 would cap that at 4%. So if that section of code had been in place, it would have capped the property tax at 20 million instead of 30 million. HB 434, funding for necessarily existent small schools and rural schools amendments. In general, I don't think any charter schools are NEST schools, but just for your information, the changes to the NEST provisions were fairly technical, and were all based on a working group, some recommendations from a work group that we worked with. The rural schools amendments, I should have looked to see if charter schools would qualify for this, but currently the rural schools program, it's a $100,000 program, reimbursement program to support the travel costs related to curricular and co-curricular activities for schools within the counties of the 4th, 5th, or 6th class. I'm not sure how many of our charter schools are in those counties. So if any of you are in the county of a 4th, 5th, or 6th class, let me know. The money would be, you'd be able to apply for a reimbursement of your travel costs, and there is a prioritization for those that support arts programs like a choir or a symphony type or a orchestra type program. Okay, SB 104, local education levy state guarantee amendments. That bill impacts mostly, if not exclusively, districts, but essentially would allow school districts revenue per student to be able to get more from the local and board, the board and the levy, the voted and board guarantee programs. So I don't think that those apply to charter schools. SB 113, the arts program funding amendment, simply requires the board to make recommendations on funding increases to the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Arts Program. This program also received an additional, I believe it was $4 million this year to support Beverly Taylor arts specialists in our schools. Okay, next slide. SB 202. This bill might be of interest to you all. It is a bill that provides that schools may update, and I was just going to grab that language. Here it is. That states that a school may provide, or an LEA may make adjustments to the LEA's general entry ledger, as long as that's done in accordance with GAAP, the generally accepted accounting principles, to accurately reflect the LEA's use of funds for allowable costs and activities. So that we will be providing some more clarity on the timelines and what that means as far as how many times you can update your ledger. But at the very least, you can see that SB 202 allows that to happen during the fiscal year within your reporting, and then at the close of that fiscal year. So, and this applies to all LEAs, not just charter schools. All right, there's no questions. I'll turn that back over to Jeff to cover the next couple slides.
Thank you, Angie. These next ones deal with students in schools in some capacity. I won't spend too much time on a lot of these. I think they're fairly small in who they impact. This is not necessarily every LEA, but the exception to that on this slide is House Bill 14. This bill creates unified definitions statewide regarding what is an absence and what absences count toward a truancy. So be aware that the reporting that you give to our data and statistics team here at the State Board of Education will have a new uniformed definition and look. Hopefully it won't be too different from what you were already doing anyway, but we wanted to create uniformity across the state for what those measures are. Additionally, this bill will require that you report to the State Board of Education absences that are with a valid excuse and those that are without a valid excuse. Right now, LEAs are required to report absences, but the State Board does not know what it is looking at when it looks at the category of absences. It doesn't break out if they're excused or unexcused. So that will help us informing policies down the road in relation to what actual issues are we facing with student absenteeism. House Bill 68 is the apprenticeship and work-based learning amendments. This just takes the apprenticeship and work-based learning programs and shifts some of the control and elements of it over to the Governor's Office of Economic Development with the Talent Ready Utah program that they run. This will just streamline some coordination with industry, but really the vast majority of this is going to be influencing and impacting the State Board of Education and how certain things work behind the scenes. I don't really see this bill impacting LEAs out front. House Bill 376 changes the exemption list for LEAs who are exempted from having to participate in the dropout prevention programs, including LEAs that have a very small graduating class. So if you're a smaller LEA than a secondary school, this bill might actually make it a little bit easier for you not to be looped into this program. Senate Bill 147 is a school internship safety agreement. Previously, in order to have a student go do an internship at an employer of any kind, the employer was required by law to undergo the same background checks. The employee that would be offering the internship and providing supervision to the student would have to undergo the same background checks as teachers and other professionals that get licensed in the school setting. This does away with that requirement. So the employee of the employer offering the internship to the student no longer has to have a background check, but there will have to be a safety agreement in place between the employer and the LEA regarding how they're going to make sure that the student is kept safe and away from harmful individuals and things such as that. So that one just makes things a little bit easier, hopefully, for everyone in not having to do that and create more opportunities for internships. And we'll pass it back over to Angie.
All right, I briefly mentioned HB 67 a moment ago. That bill, again, it's tied to a $4 million appropriation to provide reimbursements or grants to LEAs for purposes of their, to use to upgrade or support their financial information systems. So more information will be coming about that. As Scott Jones mentioned in the chat box, that there will be, the state board will have a list of financial systems that would qualify for the grant or the reimbursement. And so stay tuned for more information on that. SB 124, American Indian and Alaskan Native Education Amendments, is a bill that simply removed the pilot from 2 existing pilot programs that provide funding for schools with a concentration of students who are of American Indian and Alaskan Native origin. And the money is used for stipends, recruitment, retention, professional development, et cetera. If you aren't already receiving money under that program, you likely don't qualify, but it is no longer a pilot program, it's an ongoing program. Okay, next slide. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, so these next 2 are pretty quick. House Bill 372 is the Digital Wellness, Citizenship, and Safe Technology Commission. I'll try and say that one 5 times fast. This one essentially just creates a commission, a legislative commission staffed by legislative staff to look at digital citizenship and wellness statewide and offer policy recommendations to the State Board of Education as well as to the legislature on things they can do regarding digital wellness and citizenship. House Bill 360, the Interactive Reading Software Amendments. This amends existing code internally. This was sought by the State Board of Education. Some of the funding, 4% of the appropriation we receive for early learning software is allowed to be used for certain things. We just got that language changed to allow it to be used for administrative costs in running the program and take out the platform itself, because we could receive a separate appropriation for the platform to pay for it. So this is more of an in-house technical bill that kind of cleans some things up and makes our life internally a little bit easier on this program. I'll keep going with school busing and transportation. These may not have a huge impact on all of you, but if you do have a school bus fleet, Highway Patrol is supposed to inspect all of your bus fleet. This now just says they will do a sampling of 20% of your fleet and do a deeper dive if there are issues with that sampling. House Bill 84, just as a citizen, you might want to be aware of the fact that they increase the fine amount if you drive past a bus while it has the amber lights flashing with the stop. So you'll be paying more for that ticket if you break that traffic law. I'll go back to Angie.
I apologize, I couldn't find my unmute button. The next 2 bills are school fees related bills. The first one, HB 80, requires certain information to be reported to the state board related to school fees. As some of you may know, Representative Robertson, who sponsored the bill, has been interested in finding out how much our school districts and charter schools charge in curricular fees, meaning those related to during the school day activities. He's expressed many times that he'd like to support eliminating curricular fees and then allowing LEAs to only charge fees for extracurricular and co-curricular activities. So part of this report would help identify how much our system is imposing or collecting in school fees in those different areas. The other thing HB 80 did is it amended the definition of school activity clothing to replace the words color and imprint with brand. And the reason that's significant, and I know some of you, I don't know if a majority of you, but many of you have school uniforms, which are treated a little differently under the school fees laws. But if you don't have uniforms and you do, ask students to say wear all black to a performance or something like that, the idea is we had some schools that were a little nervous that they were violating the school fees laws. And so more information on the school activity program or school activity clothing and other changes made in HB 80 will come from our USBE school fees project team, and they can talk to you more about that. HB 391 essentially or simply codifies the definitions of instructional materials, instructional supplies, and instructional equipment. Currently, the definition of textbooks, as many of you may know, starting with the 22-23 school year, you will no longer be able to charge fees related to textbooks. The definition that's currently in code is very broad, and it would be difficult for some of our, say, CTE programs or different programs that have instructional equipment that and supplies to be able to continue forward if they could not charge fees. So that's why those definitions are important. It would allow you to continue to charge fees for instructional supplies and instructional equipment. Okay, next slide. All right, Jeff, if you want to highlight, we just have a couple more minutes and then we'll open it up to you all. Go ahead.
And I won't dive deep into every single one of these bills, as they may not all apply to the charter context, and some of them are just more FYI. But House Concurrent Resolution number 3 is one I would highlight, encouraging a conversation for those who have secondary grades, really the high school grades of 10th, 11th, and 12th, of considering late start time. Just encourages a conversation, doesn't require anything. I'll jump down to Senate Bill 21, Education Amendments. This bill does 4 separate things. They're all technical in nature, and that's why, and none of them are related to each other, so they kind of set them all into this like technical fix-it bill. The biggest one that I would highlight is changing the annual application requirement for the teacher supplemental salary program. And you no longer have to apply annually. Once you're in, and we would handle that internally. And Senate Bill 79, I would just highlight, say, I know some of you are members of a regional service center. This now makes regional service centers regional education service agencies, or RESAs or RESAs. We haven't decided which acronym or pronunciation we're going to go with. RESA better than RESA, but this allows them to essentially apply as an LEA themselves. So if you are a member of a regional service center, you would have to all give your permission collectively. If there's a dissenting voice, you would not be able to have the regional service center apply. But if you all agreed to forego individual applications to any grant program, you could collectively apply to any of them now from your regional service center. Senate Bill 58, Deborah, great question. That one is an interesting bill that essentially is addressing kickbacks. And Angie, you'll have to correct me if I'm totally off my memory on this one, but essentially prohibits certain types of conflicts of interest and kickbacks that parents and students could receive from outside entities for endorsements, or, here, wear my Nike products because you're an all-star athlete and I'll give you this money and everything else. It kind of addresses some of those issues, it prohibits some of that activity. That's just my general summary of it. I always like to try and read between the lines on bills and trying to figure out what was the story behind it. I don't know what the story behind this one is, but I'm kind of curious as to what it is. I don't, Angie, if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah, I don't know the backstory on this one either, but it does apply to K-12 schools, high schools. And it also talks about whether it kind of limits what an athlete agent may do. I would say that most of what this bill does is it applies to those who work with student athletes or are recruiting them. So likely not applicable to you, but you would all want to be very careful if you've got a star athlete at your school. You may want to be aware, and you have recruiters coming to you I mean, it really governs them, those recruiters and those agents that work with those athletes. But yeah, I don't know any more on that one. It would be interesting to know the backstory.
For sure. I think we'll pass it back to Angie for the next one.
Okay, and then this is the last slide with bills that we have before we wrap up. I'll mention really just SB 166 on this list is probably the only one that's really of much interest to you all. It amends some requirements related to how UETN is treated as an entity for purposes of sharing data, and clarifies that UETN or UEN can contract on behalf of an LEA for purposes of data sharing. The second part of SB 166 that definitely applies to you all is that starting this July 1 of 2020, we were meeting the State Board of Education was supposed to publish data or a report related to law enforcement activities on school grounds. And that information would, of course, come from you all. There was a requirement for you all to send us any law enforcement related incidents on your school grounds up to us. That would include school resource officers, if you have any. We've been working the last year or so to with law enforcement to find out how to communicate that information without creating too much burden on the system. The good news is that reporting requirement has been delayed by 3 years to July 1, 2023. So we will continue to work with you all as well as the law enforcement agencies that work come onto your grounds about how to best get that data up to USBE to do the report. So I believe that is the last bill. Jeff, unless there's questions, and please feel free to ask questions about any of the bills that we did not cover. As you all, I'm going to give you all an opportunity to just let us know if you have final questions or comments. While you're thinking about that, you can see there's 2 links here, and I've been told that they may not be working. If they aren't working, please come to the state board's website. Jeff, if you could go to the board's website and show everybody on the front page, you'll see that the second scrolling banner after the coronavirus is the legislative session summary. You can click on that banner. It will take you to our legislative landing page. And here you can see a copy of what we normally call the bill book. It's the 2020 Public Education Summary. The first one is an electronic version, which I'm assuming most of you, as you're accessing it, would probably access it electronically or on your computers. The bill book has links to bills. It's got funding information, although this year that funding information is subject to change more than ever. And I apologize for that. And not that I can take responsibility for it, but I'm just saddened by it because I was so happy with how much we received this year. And also there's a quick guide that is on that same page. That might be something you could use if you were doing your own legislative presentation, for example, with your board or with your staff or others. It kind of gives the highlights of the fiscal bills and then kind of the top, what I would say probably 18 or 20 bills. We also will post the PowerPoint presentation that we use today. It'll be on this page hopefully later this week, so that if you again wanted to refer back to it, or if you wanted to use it yourself or something like it, you could at a later date. The PowerPoint presentation that we post on this website will have links to the bills in the PowerPoint also. I think that's all all that we wanted to share with you as USBE staff. Do you have any questions for us, comments, anything we can help you with? Please let us know. And just as a reminder, we will be meeting again tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Again, tomorrow's agenda will be more focused on the 3 phases of learning related to the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll talk about graduation, grading. We'll be talking about the federal waivers, the state waivers, and the upcoming special session. So please join us again tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Thank you. we're happy to be here with you. I'm glad that we were able to put this together and see some of you, at least by name and through comments. And thank you all for all that you do. We really appreciate your leadership, and I don't want to restate what Superintendent Dixon said, and I don't know if she has anything to add, but we really are so impressed by the work that you all are doing to support your schools and your students. I've heard some amazing things going on in our charter schools. Thank you for all the work that you do. It's been wonderful to be with you. Thanks, Cindy. All right. Well, it looks like we just got a lot of thank yous and right back at you, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Take care.